we go.
New finding from the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine finds that about a quarter of Americans 65 and older are socially isolated, and more than 40% say they feel lonely. COVID-19 has highlighted these issues, especially among seniors, and our Chloe Thibault is here this morning. She's been following this and how much of an effect loneliness can actually have on someone's physical health. Good morning, Chloe.
Hi, Sharon. Good morning. Yeah, research shows that prolonged social isolation and loneliness can have adverse health impacts comparable to smoking 15 cigarettes a day. It's a serious issue that's getting nationwide attention.
Every now and then I miss tactile sensation. I'd like to give somebody a hug.
84-year-old Beverly Kelly says COVID-19 hasn't changed her life much. She just misses her family and wants to hug the people she loves.
It's what gives our life meaning.
Eleanor Rennie is on the same page. She's 80.
I think you have to reach out to other people. Otherwise, you just get so isolated that it's not the way life is supposed to be.
On Thursday, the Senate Aging Committee held a hearing to discuss the importance of social interaction among seniors, especially in light of COVID-19.
If seniors are isolated for a long time and don't have human contact, that they tend to develop serious health problems.
Senator Collins says those problems include an increased risk of stroke, heart disease, Alzheimer's, and depression. When it comes to COVID-19's impact,
it's worsening the health conditions that are caused by prolonged isolation.
that's why seniors are encouraged to reach out if they're experiencing signs of social isolation, like feeling sad or bored, being withdrawn, or not enjoying their life. But the responsibility can't just fall on them.
Family members and friends need to make a special effort to keep in touch with seniors.
Because Mainers are resilient, and sometimes it's hard to ask for help.
I think people just have to realize that it's a time that you should be really good to other people that sometimes you just take for granted.
Now, a committee with the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine has come up with some solutions to address social isolation. Those include improving awareness among the healthcare workforce and the public about social isolation and strengthening ties between the healthcare system and community networks or resources. Live at home this morning, Chloe Thibault, News Center, Maine.
So that's just a short video. Most of the videos that are about seniors and loneliness actually come out of the UK. And the reason for that is the government of the UK recognized several years ago that they had a serious problem with seniors' loneliness. And so what they did is they set up a ministry connected to their Ministry of Health that it looks only at seniors and loneliness. But that was a little clip connected to a project out of Maine. Now, obviously speaking, it was referring to COVID, and COVID seems to be not quite over, but still it's not as it was a year ago. So obviously speaking, it might have a different sort of feeling to it, but nonetheless, the issues remain the same. Caring from our own. So the purpose of this whole program is the concept of caring for our own, caring for the people in our community who we know. And we recognize that there's a culture of abandonment. So so those who know me know that I'm the executive director of the Euthanasia Prevention Coalition. So one of my areas of obviously expertise is euthanasia, assisted suicide. And so in Canada, we have this issue now of assisted death, euthanasia, assisted suicide. And I talk about this culture, and I refer to it as a culture of abandonment, and you'll see what I'm getting to. I talk about how it's essential that people who feel that their life lacks value, purpose, or feel that there's no one who cares for them, or they need support, or they lack genuine hope, that they have significant community, that this is a very important thing. The concept of euthanasia and assisted suicide is sold to us as about pain, people in pain, people suffering. And in reality, when we look at the data, it's highly also connected to loneliness and isolation. The answer is to care for people who are and journey with others through the difficult times of our life. So when we're talking about euthanasia and assisted suicide, we might think, oh, well, my friends, they wouldn't consider that because, they're part of a faith community, or they're part of this community. And, we're not like that. We don't really believe in that kind of idea. And yet the reality is we're all human. And in our human nature, we're all affected by these issues. We all go through loneliness. We all, at times in our life, feel that our life lacks meaning, purpose, or value. And we lose that connectedness to sometimes why we would oppose the concept of euthanasia and assisted suicide. And actually, I have to, there we go. A recent study out of Copenhagen University. Now, what's important about Denmark is Denmark has an excellent system for doing research because, like Canada, they have a universal healthcare system. But they have a system which tracks everybody. So they did a study on people who had had a heart attack. So everyone who had had a heart attack joined this study or were asked to join the study. So this recent study found that women who described themselves as lonely were 3 times more likely to die within a year of a heart attack than those with an active social life. And men who described themselves as lonely were twice as likely to die within a year. So obviously the key to that study was showing that there are serious health related issues to loneliness, isolation, and depression. Patients who were lonely were also 3 times more likely to be anxious, depressed, and they reported a lower quality of life. Now, a survey done, this was in actually 2020, a survey of 1,896 seniors 65 and older in the UK found that more than 1 in 5, 22%, said they have a conversation with no more than 3 people over the span of an entire week. Now, you might say, yeah, well, Alex, that's the UK. I'm assuming that Canada is not all that different than the UK, that we have similar problems here. So they're clearly showing that you have 22% of seniors over the age of 65 who are saying that they speak to no more than 3 people over the span of an entire week. A quarter of older adults said that it makes them feel good when someone smiles or acknowledges them while waiting in line at places like the bank or a grocery store. And 1 in 5 would be thrilled if someone just stopped to ask them how their day has gone. So according to the U.S. Census Bureau, this is data that was obtained by the American Association of Retired Persons. They say that 12.5 million older adults live in a 1-person household, representing 28% of people age 65 and older. But the national poll on healthy aging, which was done by the American Association of Retired Persons, reported that 1 in 3 senior citizens are lonely. I mean, you may say, Alex, that's the US. We're Canadians. I think we're probably very similar. Research shows that chronic loneliness can impact older adults' memory, physical well-being, mental health, and life expectancies. The authors wrote in the report, more than a third of seniors in the poll said that they felt a lack of companionship, and almost 30% said they socialize with friends and family or neighbors only once or less per week. Now, for those who are part of a faith community, I'll tell you right off the bat, there's a big advantage of being part of a faith community because you're likely to socialize at least once a week with somebody. Hopefully, if you're a greeter at a church, you're recognizing that there might be seniors coming there who nobody speaks to over that week and make it your particular focus to do so. When euthanasia was legalized in Canada, many thought they would only impact a few people. Well, the latest data just came out. I just reported on it yesterday, and it showed that there was 10,064 assisted deaths in Canada in 2021. Now, you could ask the question, why is it August of 2022 when the data for 2021 finally came out? Well, you know, I guess the government wasn't overly concerned about getting us fresh and clean data very fast. And that was up from 7,603 in 2020 and 5,661 in 2019. So the trend is up, and the trend is up very quickly. In Ontario, there has been, since legalization until the recent report that I just received on June 30th, 11,620 reported assisted deaths in Ontario, and the trend is up. Why is this important? These are all data. This is just these are numbers, right? You look at this and say, those are statistics, Alex. Statistics, what do they mean? Well, individual cases mean something, but 1,740 of those 10,064 assisted deaths in 2021 listed loneliness and isolation as their reason for asking for euthanasia. Someone's trying to call me, I'm not answering. Why do people ask for euthanasia? Well, we're told that people ask for euthanasia because of pain and suffering. That's what we're told, but the data suggests that very few people actually ask for this reason. Most people are not radical autonomists. Radical autonomists are demanding death by lethal drugs. You're saying it's my body, my choice, my freedom. Most people are not actually in that situation. Most people do not hold those views. When you look at data, very few people come to this from that point of view. Most people ask for death because they are at a difficult time in their life. They feel lonely, depressed, socially isolated. They feel they've lost hope, meaning, purpose. An Irish study that was conducted recently found over a 6-year period. Now, this study looked at the question of a wish to die. Now, why did this study actually happen? Ireland's also been debating euthanasia. So a study looked at the question of people who have a wish to die. The study followed 8,174 people over the age of 50, and it found that 3.5% of the people in the study had a wish to die. Those who had a wish to die, 72% identified themselves as lonely, and 60% were identified as having significant depressive symptoms. So loneliness and depression are clearly connected to a wish to die. We need a culture that cares for people, not one that kills. Euthanasia threatens my life. Well, why is that? Because I'm a human being. That's why. Human experience tells us that it's normal for a person who's experiencing serious illness or personal difficulties and loneliness that they will also fear for their future. They'll question their purpose for living. They experience existential distress or situational depression. It's normal in these situations when you have serious illness to lose hope. A lot of people go through that. That's not an abnormal human experience. Suffering alone also, loneliness and isolation and depression, loss of hope or purpose. These are leading reasons why people ask for death. So when you look at the data and it says, oh, there was, a certain percentage were asking for death for this reason, the underlying reason why they're actually asking for death often leads to a question of loneliness and isolation. So by being with others, you can make a difference in their lives. You can help protect them from euthanasia. The Compassionate Community Care Charity was created to help people who experience difficult health conditions and to provide a training program for people to visit those who are living with loneliness and isolation. The Compassionate Community Care Volunteer Training Program gives you the tools to visit and be with others, and we can change the world one person at a time. We can protect people by caring. So this program training, by visiting, journeying with, being with, and caring for others, we affirm a person's purpose for living. We reduce their loneliness and isolation. We help them find a way through their depression, isolation, and we allay their fear of suffering. God created us to be with others. The whole concept of this program is to recognize the need of the others and to recognize that we all live in communities, whether it be a faith community, whether it be a neighborhood, a small community of whatever it might be, and that we know people and people know us. But if you're connected, for instance, to a faith community or Knights of Columbus group or things like this, there are people who we genuinely are able to connect with and help them. We have to recognize that every human person, it's normal for them to experience loneliness and isolation if that's what's happening to them. Interconnectedness is essential to the human person. This is what's essential to the human person. We are all been affected by the legalization of euthanasia. We live in what I call a culture of loneliness. If you don't believe me, start riding the bus. Ride the bus around your city, get on the subway, and look around. Yes, there's lots of people who are active and doing things, but there's an awful lot of people who are alone. It affects our quality of life, and it could be a threat to our life. We're focusing on visiting the lonely and caring for our own, our members, people in our parishes and our communities. It is our goal to replace the culture of death with a culture of care, compassionate community care. We're going to go to Kathy, and she's going to begin the first chapter of Our Human Needs. And so our goal is actually, we've slotted for 2 hours. Our goal is to get this done in less than 2 hours because we want to respect your time. And then tomorrow night is the last part of the presentation. So this is quite a substantial, but I think you're going to find over the next 2 evenings, you're going to learn an awful lot. And you're going to gain a lot of information on the whole concept of what people are going through and why, not only why we need to visit them, but what we might experience as we visit people and why it's important.
Wonderful.
Kathy.
Thank you, Alex, and thanks so much for that introduction. That's great. So Compassionate Community Care is a wonderful organization, and through this organization, we're able to lead these great programs. So tonight's being with, I'm going to be focusing on our first chapter. So if you happen to have your training manual with you, some of you have physical copies. You may have asked or requested a few ahead of time. I can send these to you as well, by the way, and we can mail them out to you. Otherwise, you could look on the chat. If you can raise your hands, if you can see it in the chat, there was sent to the waiting room participants, but it should be there for everyone. Great. Thank you so much for that. So it is in there. So if you'd like to, you can actually click on that link, the first one where it says CCC training manual, and that will show you the exact book that we have in the hard copies here. And so we can send these to you as well. If you'd like a copy for yourself or for a group of you who are in an organization or maybe a diocese or for example, CWL or Knights of Columbus, that's wonderful, or any group for that matter, would be wonderful to have these great training companions. themselves. As Alex introduced the program, ultimately, I'm going to be speaking about the first chapter of the book, the training manual, which is our human needs. And as you know, we are here. I work with the director of CCC, and I love doing this very important work because we come across some really phenomenal people like yourselves here. So it's an honor to be here with you all tonight and tomorrow evening. So I really look forward to this. And as you know, obviously we have human needs, and so we're just going to jump right in. What we are finding is that when we are dealing with people who are older, there's often needs that are unmet. Especially when they maybe might be more shut in or isolated, they live alone, and they may not have that direct contact with others. So what's important to keep in mind is, for example, there's physical needs, there's mental needs, social and spiritual needs that need to be met. And looking at the whole person, it's really important that while we visit, when we come to someone's home, when we come to a center or a nursing, home that they live in are part of, oftentimes there may be a lack of companionship. So we fill that void. We actually are coming in that same idea and that same understanding that we are there to help. And we want to be a friend. We want to offer companionship, friendship. And oftentimes, this may be an opportunity to really go deeper with a person and really resolve some of those human needs that are not being fulfilled or met. So one of the things we often want to do is just go beyond the basics, which is just an introduction and kind of going to who they are and completing the chapter, as we say, or finishing off the workbook part. We want to actually go deeper and meet with people where they are now and fulfill and see if there's a gap that we can actually help them with. And that's, going into this idea of reducing loneliness and isolation, because oftentimes when I speak to people who have done being with and especially are participating in the My Story program, we often see that people are the ones who are doing the interviewing are the ones who are getting the most out of the program, and it's great because they're participating in this because they want to do well and they want to do good to others and be a part of their community, part of the solution. And oftentimes that's exactly what happens. They come out as benefiting from this process, but also the person they're meeting with is benefiting from the relationship side because you are taking out all that loneliness and that isolation. Like the video says, even just that one phone call or that one meeting in that week is going to make a drastic difference for that person. And then, of course, when you meet with people, you want to watch for signs, for example, if any type of abuse, neglect, there could be self-inflicted or someone else perhaps that isn't, impacting that person. And you definitely want to keep an eye out. Alex is going to talk a little bit about that later on and tomorrow. But for today, I just want to kind of touch on this, that these are some things to keep aware of. And also you want to often too is find a place of belonging and value for this person. So when we do meet with them, we want to make sure that they feel connected. And like Alex said, interconnectedness is really key here. So finding a common idea or a common habit, or for example, a hobby that you both enjoy is really crucial and very important too, because that will allow you to go deeper with that person and experience something both for yourself and for them that maybe bring you back and closer together. So it's really important. Okay. And as we move into this human needs point, actually, this is why we want to change the spectrum. We want to go from the unhappy to the happy. And ultimately, to do that, you want to fulfill all the needs of the whole person. So as we do that, like I said, we talk about the physical, the mental, the social, and the spiritual. As we talk about the physical needs right now, the first one, things like to keep in mind are exercise, nutrition, looking at hydration and sleep. The older you become, oftentimes the less hydrated you are. And this is something key I find coming from European background and descent. When we went back home, we would speak to our parents when I was in Poland, for example, and our grandparents. And I'd say, so are you getting enough water during the day? And they say, oh yeah, I get my glass. I had a glass of water earlier. I'm like, this is 32-degree weather. How are you drinking a glass of water in a day? That's it. And they think they have a cup of tea and that's enough hydration. So getting over kind of these kind of ideas where people often need hydration more so than they assume they do. And you can be a part of that and help and aid them in that process as well. For someone who is 65 years or older, 90% of people have at least one prescription drug that they take. More than 40% take at least 5 different drugs per week, and at least 12% take 10 or more drugs per week. So I'm not going to name names, but someone very close to me in my very close circle, and I'm speaking of my elder family members, they take a cocktail of supplements. I call them their little mix. They open up a little shot glass every day. They have the pre-planned pills, and there's about 15 pills there for the day, and that covers them for cholesterol, high blood pressure, all of it, the whole smorgasbord. So this is something I see oftentimes, and it can be very close to you as home, of course, as you know. And of course, people react differently to medications, and also hydration is really key here, because if you're not hydrated, medication will actually affect you a little differently. So typically, women take more drugs than men. And what we see oftentimes is if you take, for example, water, the medication will dissolve in the water. However, you will require lower dosages because they remain highly concentrated in the body. So then there's that pairing of, realizing what a person needs to drink of water, for example, or hydration when they're taking medication as well. So keeping that in mind when you're around, you may be part of that process. If they ask you to reach for something for them, or, relay that information, remind them, then that's great. You can remind them to drink as well. And dehydration and work, you get the same feelings as if, for example, like a woman going to labor. You can actually have dizziness, you can have some delusions, you can actually have some very powerful physical phenomena that happen to a person. They may become a little bit dizzy, fall over. That's something that's really serious. We don't want that to happen. So we want to encourage you for sure to make sure that you encourage the people you meet with to take that into consideration. Seniors, for example, have more fat as well in their bodies, oftentimes, for the most part. And so medicines that dissolve in the fat will actually accumulate, and they can stay longer in the body because kidneys and liver don't maybe work as properly. So they might need, for example, lower dosages of medication. So, there's also side effects to medications that you want to keep in mind too. So these are important factors to just really be aware of, especially when you're meeting with someone, and, what effect those medications might have on them. The next point we want to mention here is mental needs. So our brains, like yourself here, you want to be stimulated. You don't want to be bored, right? And it's funny because sometimes I've seen people not often do this, but we don't encourage that. And I hope that's not the case tonight and tomorrow. But if someone's exhausted, you can't help it, right? Like they're just simply, they're completely put off because they're just simply exhausted. And I find a lot of the time, especially with COVID, long COVID, short COVID, whatever you want to call it, there's been a lot of effects on people that they just get to a point where they're just done, like I'm just exhausted. And I myself have, 4 young little kids in the home, and I have 4 and under. So that's a lot of energy in our house. So by the end of the night, 10 o'clock, I'm done. So I can just imagine if someone's a senior and they've had to deal with someone, they might just have, this is enough. So sometimes you want to encourage, a good visit is a short visit. So mentally, depression, this is a big factor. I try to lighten the situation oftentimes, but you can't really joke around too much with depression because people are serious, and it's such a serious issue for seniors that we don't really understand until you start talking to one-on-one with people. And I don't know about you, but oftentimes I'm finding that the more people I speak to, the more the elderly, especially in the community, even younger people my age, for example, depression is starting to seep in a little bit more and more, and it's advancing in terms of how quickly I notice it. So dementia is a really serious issue. It affects 1 in 20 people over the age of 65, and 1 in 6 people over the age of 80. So as you grow older, you have higher risk of having dementia. So these are things that you want to definitely be aware of and alert to, especially if you might be, speaking with someone, those things might be actually involved and you may not be made aware of it. So just something to keep in mind in the back of your mind, especially. One thing that for mental needs that you want to maybe keep in mind as well is that stimulation, your brain is like a muscle and you want to stimulate it. So for example, if you are doing an activity with someone, you want to encourage them to be able to do things that do both mental or physical, intertwine together. And it's very important because, reaffirming them, saying that striking on an emotional need, hey, you're doing a great job, or if you're doing a game or something, a puzzle, it's nice to kind of combine those activities together. And keeping people alert and also involved is really key here. So something, for example, to keep in mind too, when we're speaking about mental needs is, for example, gardening. some people really loved gardening, but they might have been in a point of their life where they are no longer living in a situation where they have a garden or access to it. That's something that you might consider that, hey, so and so probably misses having a garden. Why don't I take them for a walk to a really nice botanical location or, garden scene that they might enjoy? And that's really encouraging to them as well. So just something to keep in mind for ways that you can stimulate their brain, but also bring them out and actually open them up to new things. One thing that we want to mention here is when we're talking about uh, also mental needs, depression is oftentimes linked to alcohol. So if that is an issue at all and it raises its head in your interaction with someone, please do start to seek some assistance or help with that, because that could be something that could be coming up as a bigger problem. So, and definitely, obviously, depression may lead to suicide. So that's where you want to be involved with the person and making sure that you speak to someone, if you're with an organization you're working with, perhaps, you can speak to your supervisor, or you can reach out to CCC. We have a helpline and you can call and get some help and feedback as well. And in terms of social needs, oftentimes we see there's a lack of strong social relationship, and that's a huge risk factor for early death, but especially for depression. And what does that mean? That means that the more people are isolated, the more they don't really want to live. And we saw that over COVID, right? A lot of people chose to die through MAID. And those were stark numbers, and very shocking that oftentimes people chose MAID, medical assistance in dying, over living, just because they were they were isolated away from their family and loved ones. These are really very strong, very important issues that we need to really raise more and more awareness to. And so we don't want to encourage more and more isolation. We want to encourage social interaction, interconnectedness, like Alex said, and ensure that you're speaking with people, you want to address this, that they are not a burden. And if someone starts using that kind of language, hey, I feel like I'm a burden, please do reassure them and bring them back to who they are. This My Story workbook is really important because it actually highlights ways in which they are involved in the world, and they've affected other people, and they've helped benefit so many lives around them. So that's why it's really nice to draw back that attention to people in the My Story program. Oftentimes, as people get older, they don't want to call as much. I notice it even with my own parents, my family. My dad will often call me in the morning, but if I haven't heard from him by late afternoon, early evening, I'll often just give him a quick call and see how he's doing. And that call makes a world of a difference. And I tell you, if I don't call him that one day, he'll say, oh, I haven't talked to you in a few days. And it's like, Dad, I just talked to you yesterday or 2 days ago, right? So you definitely want to stay on top of people. And my dad's 75. So it's a moment of time where they may not necessarily remember when we last spoke, and sometimes I forget too. So it's very nice that if you keep in touch with someone, especially if you speak with them regularly, they will realize how important they are in your life. And if you're a friend, especially, keeping in touch with someone. We just got a call a few days ago about this. A woman reached out to us and said that a woman in her street, a neighbor, misses her, she actually wants to get help in her garden, but she's considering getting MAID because of it. So because she's at, her neighbor, she's talking about getting euthanasia or assisted suicide. She's now worried, and she's reached out to us saying, she can't handle her gardening anymore. So for her, it's the opposite side. She's got too much on her plate. She's getting older. She can't manage it all. So she wants to, relieve herself of some of these things. So we're helping her take off more from her plate so she can actually enjoy her life and enjoy her home. So in terms of social needs, some people have that connection with others, others may not. So definitely you want to be social, interact, and that's how you find out how people are doing. Oftentimes we'll see people will use this word of tiredness. And like I said earlier, they may say something like, for example, I'm exhausted. Well, exhaustion comes from a mental place, but it comes from a physical place, but also a mental place. And if someone feels that they're exhausted, they may not want to be out and about and doing things with groups. So one thing to keep in mind here is if they're an introvert, you just kind of focusing on that point of being one-on-one with them will help them a lot more than maybe bring them into other situations where they have to be, in a group circle kind of situation or setting. So that's like something to keep in mind. And then in terms of communication, being a friend is really important here. Listening, oftentimes just making sure that you're there and you're hearing the person correctly is really key. We've been in contact with a woman, and where it comes to communication, sometimes people just want you to hear them out. They just want you to listen out to everything they want to bring up to you, and actually just be there for them, and listening ear. So that's really important. And sometimes if you can't communicate in person, you definitely want to reach out to them through the phone, maybe through Skype, Zoom like this, or simply writing them a nice letter. Even sometimes a note in the card and a mail would be really nice, and it's a token of your appreciation for them, and also just an awareness of how people want to be spoken to. So that's something to keep in mind as well. Finally, when we're talking about spiritual needs, thank you, Alex. There's also oftentimes we see, one of the biggest spiritual needs are obviously our relationships with God. And for some people, that relationship looks very different than what you've experienced or what you have in terms of your own life and your own spiritual sense and relationship. This means something, for example, for some people, you could be spiritual but not religious, or religious but not really spiritual. And this kind of translates into what are people's religious needs. It may go deeper in terms of what their spirituality actually represents to them. Sometimes you might actually be that missing link for what they need in their life when it comes to spirituality. Yes, thank you for that feedback. Music is vital. And I'd love to hear from you more about that, because music is important. And speaking to someone recently, they said music kind of transcends everything, and it allows people to go deeper into a place that they may not have been exposed to, especially if it's in classical music or something that they remember from the past, and it really brought something like a memory to them to the forefront. Oftentimes, being even just drawing up existential needs for someone. Where are we going? How do you want to leave this earth? Where do you feel you've left a mark on this world? Do you feel that you've had a positive impact on others? Where do you feel that your mission is heading in terms of the next few years, or even months, if it happens to be someone who might be in more of a palliative situation? This is something really key, and especially when it's going deeper into the person of, if they are in a home that they're looking at end of life, it might be that setting where you may actually decide to bring in a second person into your visits and have someone else participate in the spiritual side of the needs. I just recently went through this with a woman who's very close to Alex and myself. She passed away a couple years ago, and before she died, she really wanted to connect with a religious person, like a priest or a pastor, and kind of resolve some issues towards her end of life. And I think that was really important. So I set out on this mission to try to find her someone in her local neighborhood. And ultimately, she ended up getting someone there and speaking to her. But that was something that was really important. So that's something you might come across as well. And this will often draw you back to the people who need that inner peace. When someone is close to death or end of life, they often say that they need to find peace before they die, and they won't die until they find it. So this is something really key that we want to be a part of, and definitely you can shed light on this situation and draw people closer to God in that process and in that spiritual need. In terms of the need for giving, we often will say that there's, people that have a belief system, they may want to participate in certain forms of giving, or they need to give of themselves. They may need to give back into, their community. So you can be a part of that, and it's a grace for you to be participating in that too. So that's really beautiful. I think for a lot of people, they can go deeper in their own spirituality just by being part of this. Thank you, Alex. One other thing, just for a note here, is that when someone has asked you to pray with them, going back to the spiritual side, praying with them, perhaps starting the meeting with a prayer, that could happen. And oftentimes it's really beautiful because someone will ask you to pray for them. So just be ready. Sometimes you may want to have a book with you that's actual prayers that you think you could use, or you can come up with something spontaneous right off the cuff, like a popcorn style prayer for what you think that person needs. And you can reflect on people's life experiences as well through this process, through the prayers. And that's really nice and beautiful too.
So I was going to say something, Kathy, and that's under the whole thing of spiritual needs, and that is that the interesting thing here is that most of the people who are coming involved with the Compassionate Community Care Program are doing so through a parish or some sort of a religious community sort of organization, whether that be CWL or Knights of Columbus or a parish group itself, right? But a lot of people have issues that have happened in their life, And so the spiritual needs issue is very interesting because you know, you have to be careful with it, but everyone has these spiritual needs. So even though you might be talking to someone who, let's say, they're on the list. I'll give you an example. If it's the Catholic Women's League group, this is a person who's been a member for years. They might have had something happen to them in the past, which makes them the spiritual issue really difficult for them. Like things have happened. So this is it's a touchy issue, but we recognize it as being fundamental to that, you know, importance of the human person. I'm just saying that as we go through it, we're very careful in that area because of what people might have experienced in their past.
Absolutely. Yes.
I
Thank you
don't
for
think I
that.
have to say more than that, actually.
Yeah. Yep. No, that's so true. That's so true. And going back to one more to one point is that the need for giving is often seen in people when they are reaching that point of end of life, that they might want to give back to their community, but also give back to the next generation. And that's something that's really important. So some people feel that last little need that has not been met is that they don't have maybe children to pass along their legacy to, or perhaps an unfulfilled purpose with regards to that. So the My Story program is actually ideal because that fulfills that. It actually allows people to impart their knowledge and grace of that translation of their information to the next generation for that person. So that's really great that you're part of that. So thank you, Alex. Visiting advice. So let's get right into the visits. When we meet with someone, oftentimes before you go, this is our disclaimers here. You definitely want to encourage whatever COVID protocols are in place wherever you are meeting that person, just to be aware of that. If you can please call ahead and find out if you're visiting a hospital, nursing home, long-term care facility, a retirement residence, to find out ahead of time what their protocols are, and just to make sure that you are able to follow suit with that and prepare for it effectively. So for example, personal protective equipment, if you need sanitizer for your hands or some other, like a face mask or something, definitely reach out to them and see what that person's preferences are, because, they may be uncomfortable, for example, with or without that. So just keeping that in mind is really important. Definitely assessing yourself. If you're feeling well that day, great. Proceed with the visit, or even a few days before, if you've noticed that you might be a little bit off your off your game in terms of you may feel like you're getting sick, maybe you can suggest postponing that visit for a later time when you're actually feeling better. I know my sister-in-law today, she just gave birth to her second child. So, and I'll be the godmother, which is exciting. And she's said for us to come by, or she can Skype with us. So I'm excited to see that baby. And I know if my kids are sick, I'm not going to come by. So I just have that idea in my mind that, she's got a newborn. Maybe they don't want to have any type of risk associated with a visit. Same thing goes with the elderly. I find it's really important for seniors to know that they're safe and they feel that you're thinking of them. And that's really important to get that self-assessment. So one thing also is if you are able to visit in person, to please, keep a certain distance that you feel is healthy and safe for both of you. If you feel more comfortable sitting closer, ask them if you can move closer. Perhaps they prefer that. Definitely washing your hands or sanitizing their hands when you are going into the visit before and after is really important. And again, if you're feeling in any way off in terms of your physical abilities or feeling of your health, just reschedule. It's easier to do that than perhaps bring any kind of risk into the situation. And yeah, and definitely if you're visiting in person, and if you need a vaccine to be able to visit, ensuring that whatever those needs are actually aware of. So just that you're aware of, and that person is as well, because they may be uncomfortable not knowing otherwise. In terms of advice for visiting, definitely before you go, you want to ensure that if you're part of a group or an organization that you are volunteering with, you definitely want to make sure that you have all your checks, meaning you have a criminal background check, vulnerable sector check, and this is in the training manual, but you may need to go to the police, for example. There's usually a fee associated with it, and the group that you're with may actually cover that fee. So that's great. If you ever have that issue and that's an issue for you not to visit, then please definitely reach out to us so we can, help you with that. But ultimately, what you want to do is make sure that you have a letter or some kind of, confirmation from whatever organization you're part of, if you are part of one, to be able to visit into the community, because that's something really key that for various church groups or, religious centers, you want to make sure you're covered for that. Okay. And before you go, you definitely want to, if you have or represent an organization, having your ID present is really important. If you have teams set up, then going definitely in teams of 2 or is an ideal number. You definitely want to go out as a duo, and it helps kind of fill the void if there's ever kind of a gap in communication or kind of understanding in what's happening. It really is very helpful to have a second person there and their perspective. And definitely when you come in, you want to be obviously presentable in a casual but more professional manner. This is something where you can wear, kind of more modest clothing, but nothing too bold. We often say to people not to wear perfume or cologne, just because that might put off some people and their sensitivities. And don't, choose a time that that will work so that it's appropriate for that person. You don't want to go too early or too late. And definitely if a person has a siesta in the middle of the day, you don't want to interfere with that either. So keeping that in mind is good. And when you have an idea of their schedule, you want to don't want to really pass too many people when you know that they're going to have other visitors. So you want to make sure your time with that person is free and open, so you can actually have an activity, or you can do something that will keep you both kind of involved or entertained while you're visiting together, or at least communicate without interruptions. So, and again, if when you're visiting someone who cannot speak, you can go in pairs. So that conversation will include that person with a person, for example, who's a translator, and they can participate in that meeting together. So you want to plan ahead for that type of thing if it happens. Definitely think ahead when you go on a visit, what you can do with that person. So if you prefer, for example, to be more involved and have an activity with that person, maybe you can bring that along. We have puzzles, there's different games you can play. You can, for example, bring music, like one person just mentioned to me, playing music. If you are if you are music savvy and literate, you can actually bring an instrument with you and play or sing, perhaps. I know a lot of people love that. And even just hearing something else like that is really, really enriching for that experience and that individual. Maybe you want to have a cup of tea together or go for a walk. Those are all great ways to kind of get a person out of their element and be able to experience something different and fun, and it's creative. Some advice is when you do arrive, you want to make sure that you wash your hands. Always knock when you're entering a place, and having just that type of respect and demeanor, that you're knocking ahead, even if it's a place, for example, like a nursing home, and they may share the location or room with a person. The other person might not be aware that you're coming, so you want to ensure that they are aware of who you are and introduce yourself. Hi, my name is Kathy, and I'm here to visit with Alex. I'd love to chat for a bit if you have a minute, and see if they're fine with that. Obviously, when you enter the room, you definitely want to go ahead and just wash your hands. That's really important. I think it's really respectful. I have a baby in our home as well. We have a 5-month-old and I love it when people come over, but I especially love it when they come in and they go right to the washroom and wash their hands. I don't know if it's me or if it's COVID, but it just got me thinking, these days there's a lot of bacteria everywhere, and it's just something less to worry about when you just take that off the table and you just have that hygiene. So I don't know, that's just me, but you definitely want to have that in mind. Some people prefer it. I know a lot of people that are elderly, and one person, even before COVID, she would go to the gas station and she'd pump her car with gas, and she'd always have either a glove or one of those little bags that you get from the grocery stores. So she'd cover her hand and use that to pump gas. And it's just something, some people have those things. They prefer not having an issue with that. When you're starting the visit, you definitely want to approach the person from the front. If a person might have an issue in terms of vision or a disability, or of hearing, for example, hard of hearing, you want to make sure that they see and hear you as best as possible. So you don't want to surprise them. That could put off the visit. And you want to just introduce yourself and be very patient. If someone else is in the room, you want to make sure that they can either participate or excuse themselves, whatever works for everyone. And then always ask if you, for example, if there's a television or radio on, you can always ask to lower it, if, for example, if it's too loud for you in the scene, in the meeting. And then always turn back on before you leave. So ask them if they want it back on if you end your visit, okay? definitely introducing yourself, being attentive, sensitive, kind. All these things are so important when you're meeting with someone because they are really looking forward to meeting with you and seeing who you are. I find the best visits are with people when you're just listening and being present with them, really listening and hearing what they're saying. And so that's really important. And then, before you ever engage in an activity, tell them what you want to do. Do you want to share some information? Do you want to go somewhere? Do you want to go for a walk? Definitely invite them to what you think is a great idea, and then you can start from there. And if you decide you want to start with the My Story workbook, going into that and starting off on that foot is a really great way to break the ice too. So now we're just going to move a little bit into the communication, which is really important. Language, for example, is so important these days. I was just told the other day that, when you use too many adverbs and adjectives, it puts off a lot of people. So we want to ensure we don't really offend anyone, I guess, and, always being person first. So for example, when you're speaking and you're speaking with someone who perhaps has a disability, you will address them as a person with a disability, not a disabled person. Right. So that's the kind of language that we want to make sure that we're avoiding. And what's really important too is if a child, for example, has autism, it's a child with autism, not an autistic child, an individual with epilepsy, not an epileptic. So that's also something just to keep in mind. Right. And when we're talking to people, we always want to treat them the best, just like you would want to be treated. So if you have noticed that they have certain boundaries, they don't want to move or they don't want to get up or move somewhere, then, respect that and say, okay, that's perfect. We're just going to just stay right here. That's fine with you. Great. Always being polite, happy, cheerful is important. You are actually going to set the tone for when you meet with people. So when you come into that engagement and you walk into that meeting and you have a great energy and you're open and positive, they're already going to rise up to meet you where you are in that energy, so being open, a good listener is really key here, and that will welcome and invite them to speak to you and actually want to open up to you. Giving them a chance to respond is really important, I find. Let people talk. Let them open that floodgate, and oftentimes you'll see that there is a floodgate waiting there. Oftentimes I call people just to thank them when they give, send us a donation, and that's great because we hear from people how they feel. How has COVID affected them in the last 2 years? How are their lives now? What's their day like? So it's a great opportunity for us to connect with people, and people definitely want to share information, so be open to them sharing that information with you. Being very alert when people are talking is important. Sometimes you may want to ask them to rephrase something if you didn't quite catch it. And that's something I noticed my husband, he'll often say something and I'll often say, excuse me, what did you say? And I often will say, is there a way you can restate that? Because he'll just say it the same way. So I can't hear it again. And then he'll say it again and I can't hear it again. So I'll ask the same thing. So just, can you say that a little bit louder, please? Or can you rephrase that? That might be a nice way for someone to get that message across, and just being aware of what they might be perhaps vulnerable to is really important too. For someone, if they have a disability, we'll get into that later, but that's something just to be cautious of and always kind of keen in understanding gestures and other ways, nonverbal communication, and we'll talk about that next. So for nonverbal communication, facial expressions are so important. I will often see this with children. My kids, I have a 4-year-old, a 3-year-old, a 2-year-old, and a 5-month-old. So I've noticed that their facial expressions really run their life. And I just explained this the other day, that how you speak to people, there's an emergency level shriek. This is a small issue, response, and then there's a medium issue response. Oftentimes you don't use any of those unless you need to, and it's the small ones. But for facial expressions, it goes both ways. So if I'm excited to see you, I'm going to smile, I'm going to look at you, and I'll be engaged with you. If, for example, you're looking away and you're a little bit distracted, or you have a phone with you, we often say definitely put that away. Don't keep that nearby, because that will distract perhaps that person, and you'll notice they notice that too. So one thing you'll see is that facial expression it's especially important on how you feel about what they're saying. So if you're happy to hear what they have to say, they'll notice. In terms of touch, some people may be very sensitive to touch. That's that's actually a big love language. Out of, if you know or aware of the 5 love languages, touch can be actually very important to some people. And so if you feel that it's important to them, you can offer to hold their hand if they're comfortable with that, and just ask them first, of course, would you like me to hold your hand? Are you comfortable with this? If that's okay for you, obviously, and you're comfortable in there, you think they're also going to be comfortable with it. Your voice, the way your tone comes across is very important too. And obviously your eye contact, how, if you're avoiding contact of eyes, or for example, are you very intense and you're looking at them consistently, that will obviously have an impact on people. So you just want to be aware of that as well. And you'll notice how interested they are when they respond to you with their contact of eyes as well. In terms of body movements, the way the person sits, stands, or holds their hands is not is it also a strong indicator of how they may feel too. So they usually think that that's something that will tell a lot more. So body movements, if they're restless, maybe they need to go somewhere. Maybe they need to use the washroom. That's something you may want to give them a break and say, hey, do you want to have a quick second to use, the washroom break or anything like that? Do you want me to get you a glass of water? You could be dehydrated again. That's the other point, right? So just being aware of that. And appearance. So someone, for example, who might look disheveled a lot, that could be just the way they are. It could also be perhaps a sign of neglect. So that's something just to keep in the back of your mind too, perhaps. It's not always the case, but if a person looks unkept is one thing. But if there other signs that show that there could be an abuse or neglect happening, then definitely keeping that kind of in your mind, keeping that open to perhaps change is something that you may want to consider. So in terms of space, their personal space is their area. That's their home. So if you're walking to a room and that's shared accommodations between someone else, you definitely want to be respectful, not to touch anything, not to move anything, obviously, that you wouldn't want to, otherwise. And especially for a person, if they feel that their wheelchair, if they have one, is right beside them or they're sitting in it, you don't want to ever move that without them knowing or engaging them in that conversation first. And just being very sensitive to that person and their body language is important there too. In terms of the next slide, when we're talking to people and their emotions, I'm often very high energy. And this Alex is laughing because I try to avoid people when I notice they're busy. I try to kind of come in and out, but often high energy people will meet with other high energy people. But if you're not high energy in that moment when you're speaking to someone, going down a notch is really important because you don't want to throw them off. You don't want to seem anxious or make them anxious, right? And that's often something that can happen. Oops. So what we can do then in that case is, just finding them where they're at is really important and seeing how their day is. Sometimes they might be frustrated with something that just happened. You want to bring them back to focusing on what's important, that a situation or emotion may not just be ruling them for the rest of the day. We can get over this, we can move on to the next thing, okay? And something that is important to hear is that you may want to reflect back to them and say something like, tell them what they've said. So reflect on what they talked to you about. And so you can translate. So this is what it sounds like you feel that so-and-so hurt you, or it sounds like you feel, uncertain about what to do. Is that correct? And just rephrase or reflect the situation, be sensitive to them, and they can come back to what they need to. Because emotions might flare up in a meeting, right? A topic might come up and you might find that it really stirs or triggers someone, and you want to reflect, but also deflect and be sensitive. So be aware of whatever pain they might be encountering. Sometimes it's emotional, physical, spiritual pain. So just being sensitive of all these things. There's so many layers to a person. You can actually be peeling back some of those layers when you're talking to people about some of their life events. And that's really beautiful, but at the same time, it stirs people. And when you stir that, you might trigger certain things. Like Alex said, some things from the past or events that they may not want to recount. Being aware of what their current or past illnesses are is also really key here. And why I say this is because, for example, a person who has suffered a stroke, they may have become emotional in front of you, but it's not because of their actual situation, but it's just because of their physiological position. And so they might express something to you, and you may just want to guide them back to what, where they are more comfortable. And definitely, if something happens and they flare up or a situation arises and they express some strong emotions, you definitely want to validate their feelings. And though you may not agree with them, you can say, I understand how you may feel. You may not feel the same way, but you at least understand or appreciate how they feel. And that's really great. And of course, we're not there to argue with people. So we don't want to encourage or discourage them in certain things, but we want to bring back to the point of why we're there, which is for them to bring back a sense of, hope in their life, and definitely inspire them to speak about themselves and to share, so you can have this experience and fulfill that as well. In terms of tips, we've got great ones here. You can use statements when you're speaking in your conversations. For example, when it's windy, or if it's really, it's stormy outside, you can say, it makes me feel this way when it's windy, or whatever. You can use those kind of statements to introduce what they might be wanting to share with you. Some people may have, they see questions as intrusive. So you do want to, relieve that from a person's mindset and just simply say, okay, do you prefer sharing more about yourself right now? Or do you want to participate in this type of new engagement or activity? You can do something else, especially if you're noticing that they're getting impacted in a different way or something that they don't want. One thing to mention here is be conscious of memory issues. Because of dementia and Alzheimer's and all these other issues that are kind of gathering or layering themselves on a lot of people, especially when they get older, you want to be aware of how that may impact them. So for example, when someone has a memory issue, for example, with dementia, you can ask questions that require only a yes or no. Would you like to have some tea? Yes or no? Would you like to have a cookie? No? Yes? Perfect. Okay. So you ask one question at a time. That will encourage them to answer one way. Another thing is to encourage them about their past. You may want to, for example, to talk to them and then have them continue to talk about it. Memories might be clear to them from their past than they are actually for the present. So that's really important to keep in mind too. You might have a plan, you might be like me and you say, okay, we're going to finish this puppy in, this quarter, meaning in the next 2 to 3 months. And they might say, okay, it's going to take us a year, which means every visit is going to be a little different. So everyone has a story. You can use, the story of yourself, and you can also bring in them to know what kind of visit you have. So it's just successful each time you have it. Okay. When you are sharing, definitely we want to keep in mind some things not to do. Don't be impatient. So don't rush the conversation. We don't want to argue, although some people might like to argue. My dad is one of those people. He loves to be what they call a devil's advocate. And he definitely likes to encourage that kind of, just kind of dialogue. So definitely when you speak to people, you're not there to argue. So we don't want to encourage that. But if you are, for example, privy to certain information, for example, about their health or their situation in their prognosis, you don't want to create false hope. So we're not there to make anything better for them in terms of the medical situation, but and that may not always change or get better. So we just don't want to infuse some kind of false hope to that situation. So try to avoid that. Definitely be honest. Any kind of, lie or kind of deceit will affect your relationship. Of course, we all know this, but even something so small they could pick up on that you definitely want to be aware of, that you don't seem artificial or contrived being forced into this position or being a volunteer or even meeting with them. So you definitely want to be as open, genuine, and just humble when you're meeting with them. Okay. When you're speaking, you may come across information. There's a lot of people that love to share about their family, close friends, and networks. Definitely don't be judgmental. They might be. Please, I would avoid all that, because it is better for you and them not to participate in that kind of dialogue. You're not there to judge, right? So don't whisper to others. If you are meeting with someone and you have, for example, a translator with you, don't speak directly to the translator, but you want to speak directly to that person. Okay, the translator is an aid to that person you're meeting with. They're not there for you, perhaps, but they are there for that person. So you're both engaging to one another directly. Okay. And then when you're speaking, don't talk in front of them as if they weren't there. So if a person like from the medical team comes by, or their occupational therapies, you want to make sure that you're involving them always in it, because that's their life, right? That's their, reality. So you don't want to, speak about your own troubles. And Thank you so much, Alex. For other tips, for example, you don't want to talk about your own issues. You come in there as a clean slate. This is me and I'm happy and I'm here for you. Let's have a great visit. So you don't want to air out any bad vibe or laundry about your own situation. Don't question about their illness. That's pretty self-evident. We don't need to talk more about that. But if someone is sick, they might share with you what's wrong with them. If they have an illness, they might, go into that detail. They might not. You may never know. My husband, for example, has a visual impairment. And when I was courting him before we were married, I noticed he would have his cell phone really close like this. And I never asked him about it. And on the 4th or 5th visit, we actually noticed he wanted to share, why he did that. And I noticed that he needed to enlarge everything. So it's always a bigger font, a bigger script to be able to see what he was reading. And that's something you may come across, just to be aware of that, because that's something that may present itself with your visits. When a person doesn't want to talk, let them not talk. Maybe play some music, ask Tony to join you. We have some musicians in this group. So if you know a musician, great. Let's encourage some of that wonderful skill. If a person is speaking to you and you feel uncomfortable, definitely stay neutral in terms of your tone and voice. Any kind of unnatural tone will come across and can steer them the wrong way. So also with that, we don't want to speak too loud. We want to make sure we're level-headed. You want to keep your pace very slow as well. I try to do that as much as I can. Thank you. But I do try to slow down, because I find that is something that it helps when you're speaking with older people to make sure they understand and they capture everything you say. If they make a mistake, just keep going. Some people will find they want to buy you a gift. They might want to reimburse you for something. We try not to accept gifts. I find that's just the easiest thing, and it makes life a lot simpler, because then they don't worry about having to give you a gift every time you come back. It also takes off that pressure for them to feel that you have to reciprocate any of your time or attention towards them. And you just kind of take it off the table and say, thank you so much, but I'm here to visit with you, not for any gifts. I appreciate everything, but I'd love for you to just be with me and present with me. And that's all I need, So that's a nice way of saying it. And, of course, if you don't need to buy gifts as well in response. When you're ending the visit, everyone has good days and bad days. Sometimes you might have caught someone in their bad day. And then you just want to adjust yourself accordingly. You want to shorten the visit. You can get out of there and say, hey, listen, I can see and feel that there's something, happening that might be bothering you. And then, if you feel we can kind of end this tonight a little early, by all means, we could do that. And I can come back next time, we can start afresh. Sometimes at the end of the visit, you may want to pray. They might ask you to pray. Just be comfortable and open to that too. That's a really great way to end in a visit. And, like we say, short welcome visits are better than long ones. In Portuguese, my husband's Portuguese, they say a doctor's visit is always better than no visit. And that's when you pop in and out, you just go for coffee or you jump by and that's it. Hey, see you later. Those are my favorite personally. I'm joking. No, but honestly, you want to be very friendly, but you don't want to belabor anything. You don't want to make it exhausting for them to experience a visit with you. Planning your next visit. When you're leaving, you want to ensure that they have the right schedules for themselves for the next time that they're going to see you, and that you make a note in your notes of when you're going to see each other, what day, time, etc. And thank them. You're there for them, and you want to express that genuine gratitude that you've been able to experience that time with them. So thanking them at the end of the visit is really beautiful way to end that visit. Thank you. That's great. And then, of course, after the visit, this is something I think is really important. When you have an opportunity, definitely go and buy a notebook, because you can capture a lot. Like I have one of these for almost every discipline. And, if it's an idea for yourself, for your family, for whatever it is, this is really great and helpful to have a book, a notepad that you keep a journal of your visits. Where did you go? What did you do? Is there a certain conversation you had that you want to keep in mind? For example, those memories that they shared with you, their kids' names, something that's really important to them. Maybe you want to re-say or remind them that next time you visit with them, and that'll be really special because they found that that was a really important thing to have come up in that visit. So that also journal is only for you, just so you know. This is an important tool you're going to use, that when you're visiting with someone, you want to ensure that you evaluate yourself, and that's a great tool to have too. You know, rate yourself 9, 10, whatever it is out of 10 that day, that visit, because then when you come back, you can give yourself suggestions and room for improvement and notes of what to avoid perhaps in the next visit, because, you know, time goes and we forget things and little details. So if you can, definitely reminding yourself that when you go back to visit with them will be really important, because you'll be able to say, hey, we touched on this, maybe I should avoid talking about this topic, or we touched on this and this was really great, let's go back into that topic and see what else they want to share. And think about evaluation of what can you do better or different next time? Where can you change or adjust and make something impactful for them? Maybe bringing an instrument. If they like to play music, you can bring one for them, or try to arrange a rental or something, you know, and arrange something that will enrich that next visit. That'll be really beautiful for both of you and for them to share in. If you have any concerns or if you have a question, definitely reach out to your supervisor if you're part of an organization or volunteer group. We have a helpline. The number's there, 1-855-675-8749. That's available anytime. That's for more serious issues. So if you actually have a real serious concern, if you have questions about the ethics of what's happening, if there's an abuse situation or neglect and you think there's something that's really going on, or if that person is in a crisis perhaps and just thinks of maybe I might actually end my life or commit, you know, euthanasia or get made, then definitely you want to reach out for that support. Definitely reach out, please do. If you have any other type of administrative questions, if you would like to know anything about CCC, our programs or schedules, or in the next session like this that you can participate, or other programs we have, because we're starting new programs as well come this fall, definitely reach out to us at the office, and that's the number there, 519-439-6445. So thank you so much, everyone. And I appreciate your time with this section right now. Wonderful.
So the visiting program was developed basically because we recognized the whole issue of loneliness and isolation. And from the beginning, we recognized also how this affects people. So the idea was, how do you actually care for your own, the people in your community, you know, people in your groups, whether that be a church community, whether that be other community groups, people who you know, how do we protect them in these times of this cultural shift that's happened? And we recognize the difficulties now that with extensive loneliness and isolation that exists. So we developed the program. And then after the program was developed, we recognized that there was something in the program that was very powerful that brought it all together, that made it really work well. And it was the My Story part of it, the My Story. So the whole thing about My Story is we're dealing with the fact that people are going through difficulties in their life, but when you speak to them about themselves, when you ask them about themselves, when you ask them to talk about themselves, when you ask them to share their story, we're doing two things. We are alleviating their own feelings of lack of hope, purpose, or meaning, but we're also creating our own history. What am I saying? Like if you're involved with, like, say, a Catholic Women's League group as an example, and you're talking to a woman in your group who was one of the leaders many years ago, but is not involved anymore, not because she doesn't want to be, but because of her age and her health issues. Well, obviously speaking, her talking about her story is something that really builds her own feeling of, I accomplished something, I am important, I'm a needed person. But on top of it, what it does, it creates our history. So we have a twofold thing. And the other thing is the My Story program offers the answer to the big question is, how do you go in and see somebody? You know, why would someone want to actually talk to you? Some people may not want to talk to you. They might say, well, you know, why am I going to have Wayne come over and talk to me as an example? Why am I going to do that? And so why would I do that? Well, because we're going to talk to them about their story. We're going to ask them about them. We're going to find out about their past and ask them to talk about what's happened in their past. So I think this is a very important thing. So we're dealing with all these questions of depression, the generativity, the history, right? The loneliness. We're creating self-awareness, self-discovery. We're dealing with their self-esteem, social isolation, and sadly, We're not trying to be psychiatrists or psychologists or anything, but sadly, when you talk to people about their story, what happens? You do talk about their trauma a little bit. Now, a lot of people go through depression. It's very common. I showed that video in the beginning. Kathy's talked about it a little bit. So when we're talking about depression, we recognize that, by being with another person, you are then providing for them this, how would you say, this interconnectedness. We are giving them an out. We're helping them relieve them of their depression. We're not actually doing anything per se, other than being kind and talking to them and asking them about themselves. Sometimes you only ever listen to somebody because they just really get this opportunity to talk. They want to talk. Anyway, but it's alleviating that depression that they're experiencing. Generativity. Well, people want to share. They want to have meaning in their life, right? And sometimes as they're getting older, they want to share something of their past. They want to have that go forward. And this is a way of doing that because they're talking about their past. They're talking about what they experienced. They're providing for us then a history, but at the same time, they are talking about their past. They are sharing what their knowledge is, and they're providing that for the next generation. And I think this is very important. It gives them the opportunity to do so as they're talking about their story. Loneliness. Loneliness is a fundamental problem in this culture. The culture has shifted on us. So what was existing 40, 50 years ago is really different now. Now, I live in a small community. So I live in the mighty metropolis of Glencoe, Ontario. So you can look it up. We're not so bad. We do have a Tim Hortons. But anyway, the fact of it is that it's a small town, okay? And in the small towns, it's possible things are a little different, but they're not overly different than a big city. Because what you find in the small town is you might have a lot of older people living there, but very few of them have their children living nearby, meaning that there isn't work in the small town of Glencoe. There is actually some, and in our town we actually do have a factory still and a few other things. But I mean, in most places there isn't work unless you're a farmer and their son took over the farm type idea. You know what I'm saying? And so what happens is you might have had 3 or 4 kids, but one lives in Victoria, one lives in Toronto, one lives in wherever. You don't know where. They're all over the place. So what become the reality is in your older age, as you're losing your abilities to get around, possibly your ability to effectively walk, you might not be going to church anymore. Why? Not because you didn't want to go to church, because it was too difficult to go to church. Sometimes the church really should be looking at providing a service to help people get to mass because they can't get there on their own anymore. They just simply can't. They need someone to help them. But loneliness is a natural reality. It's called being human. We all go through it. Self-awareness and self-discovery. Well, then my story really helps that. A lot of people, they've gone through all these different experiences in their life, and as they're getting older, while they're spending more time alone, etc., they might start really feeling that point. They're questioning, what was my purpose? What did I achieve? People go through these sort of existential feelings. Some of them actually go through that so much that they might think that they're better off dead. I hate to say it, but some people do have these feelings. And so when you're talking with them, it's creating a self-awareness and a self-discovery of the things they did. They did important things in their life. They have a meaning. They have a purpose. And we're helping them discover that or rediscover that about themselves. We're creating self-esteem. You know, someone feels down about their life. Why do they feel down about themselves? Well, because life has changed. They used to have a job. They used to do things. They might have had one time they might have been married with children and whatever they were doing, and they were busy and they had things to do in their life. And now life has changed. They might have lost their spouse, and life has become far more difficult. And you're talking to them, you're helping them by having them talk about their past, and you're writing these issues down. You're showing interest in them. It's not that I'm showing interest for my own purposes. I'm going there to recognize that we're an interdependent community. We need each other, and that person needs the caring response of the community. We're helping them have self-esteem. Social isolation is a serious problem in this culture. We've got more resources, more people than ever before. And I know there's some cultures that still have a lot of great interaction, how they are formed in their culture. They really encourage that interaction. But for most people, they become socially isolated as they get older. And what makes it worse is often they get moved into a nursing home. So let's say they used to live on, Elm Street, and they had their house there. They lived there for 30 years. And yes, the neighbors changed over time, but they had an identity. They had a place. And now they're in a nursing home. Well, it's very difficult. And there's people living in the nursing home, but it's not the same as being in my place, my home with my identity and my pictures and my life around me. It's not the same thing. We experience social isolation. And of course, some people have experienced trauma. Now, none of us here are in any way telling you that you should learn to be a psychiatrist now or a psychologist, or you should encourage yourself to be in any way that way. All we're doing is wanting to talk to people, have them tell their stories, encourage them. We want them to be interconnected. We want them to feel the importance of the things that they've accomplished in life. But the reality is a lot of people have experienced trauma. And if they do start feeling more comfortable with you, they're going to tell you these things. I'll give you an example. My mother was doing this in Woodstock. She was contacting people and asking them about their past. And there was this one woman in particular who shared a whole important part of her life. She talked about her childhood, and she went through all these issues because she knew this woman was alone, and they had a relationship as a friendship. So this woman says, "Yes, Mary, I'd love to talk to you about my story," and she did. And my mother had no idea that this woman had gone through so much trauma in her life. So no one's here to tell you, "Oh, I'm going to now be your counselor." No, you're not a counselor. But obviously, when you're talking to someone, these things will come up, and it's important to recognize that as people talk about their issues, we're not offering advice, or we're not trying to correct them and say, "Oh, well, you could have done such and such." No, we're not doing that, but we're recognizing as they talk about it, it's helping them deal with some of these traumatic things in their life. We're not in any way wanting to dig things up. That's not our role, not our interest. We're caring about the individual. We just recognize that it's a reality when we talk to people that trauma might have come up. When we're talking about faith, remember I mentioned that also. I specifically mentioned that when we're talking about faith, not because I think that we should be afraid of talking about faith, but because some people do have trauma. And if that came out, obviously speaking, this is a concern, and we have to be very careful because we don't want to create issues, but we do want to help them through it. Not that we're trying to be a psychiatrist or anything, but we're talking to them. They're going to be bringing these things up, right? That's what's going to happen. Okay, my story matters. Why does it matter? Well, we're recalling events, feelings, key topics in someone's life. So the whole My Story booklet, and I don't know, Kathy, I'm assuming that has been emailed out to people and everything. So what happens when you're talking to people is you have a series of questions in there. Now there is an addendum booklet that was designed for people, let's say in groups like a Catholic Women's League and that deal with issues more related to, let's say, with the church, church experience, where you're involved in the church, where you're involved, these kind of things that could be shared with you. But the My Story booklet itself is not an exhaustive thing, but it deals with the basic questions of one's life. And it gives us a guide for talking to people about their life. It's very important. So what's happening is they're recalling events. Even somebody who has some dementia, often they might have a hard time remembering what they had for lunch today, but they can tell you what happened in the 1950s and 60s very well. They have good memory of their childhood, but they might not have very much memory of what's happened in the last week. So this is actually good for them. It actually helps them with their brain working, keeping them active, and helps them tell their stories. They're sharing their memories. It's a form of healing for the person. So once again, we're not a psychologist or anything like that. We're not trying to be, but reminiscent talk, having them talk about their past, they're sharing about themselves. That's a form of healing. It really does help a lot of people. And we're not doing anything. We're not judging them. We're not trying to create anything here. We're just simply helping them talk about it because we're interested in them, and we recognize that it's important for the human person to have that opportunity to share. It improves their cognitive function. Well, we already know if you don't exercise the brain, you're going to have problems. It's good to do a Sudoku game and things like that for people. Why? Because it helps them exercise their brain. But we need to do these things. Well, talking about our past is a good thing. It's a very good thing. It helps us with our cognitive function. They have an important place in the world. We're affirming them. Why are we affirming them? We're trying to protect our own. We're also trying to affirm our own. We recognize that people need affirmation. If you're living in a nursing home, you might never get affirmation. You might get asked, "Oh, did you enjoy lunch?" But I mean, the staff there are probably very nice people, but they're busy. Now, in some nursing homes, there might be some problems with staff. Let's not get into that. I don't know. But the fact of it is most of these people are doing that kind of work because they're trying to do good things for other people. But nonetheless, we are affirming that they have an important place in this world, and it's practical. Everything we're doing is very practical. We're not getting into anything that's very impractical. They're talking about their lives. Reviewing one's life and writing down one's story has many, many benefits. So I look at the My Story program as having two purposes. Well, one, it's actually what introduces or allows us or enables us to have people say, yes, I'd love to have you come over, Byron. I'd like to have you. Yeah, great. Come on over, come visit me. So obviously speaking, if you know the person already, it's very important that, well, they might be willing to talk to you like that. But I mean, if they're part of a group that you're part of, so let's say you're a part of the Knights of Columbus or a group like that, and this is a person who's on your list, and you know of them, but you really don't know them, you would have to call them from that point of view. I would say right off the bat, it's good to go with two people when you don't really know somebody. Why would you do that? Well, you're trying to protect, in this case, yourself in case something happens. But secondly, you're trying to make sure that that person is protected too. So you have that situation. But once you get to know somebody, visiting somebody is very enjoyable, and spending time with them. We've had people who've taken the training program and then got involved with visiting people, and they've just loved it. They've just enjoyed it completely. It was something that they found that was really helpful to their lives. But what we're actually talking about is whether it's helpful to your life or not. We're doing this because we recognize the reality of the loneliness in our culture and how that affects people, and how now that we've legalized euthanasia and assisted death, this is a dangerous reality for people, and we have to be a caring part of that culture. We also know that there's lots of people, like, we're living longer now. There's lots of people who were part of our community who we might have known 10, 15 years ago, who we don't see anymore, but those people are still alive. They need you, and we need them. They are a part of our community. They're a part of who we are, especially as a faith community. Depression. While seniors are at a much higher risk of suicide. Now, I recently wrote an article about this because someone questioned me, and the Canadian data doesn't show that men aged 85 to 89 have the highest suicide rate. But the US data clearly shows that the age group 85 to 89 men have the highest suicide rate. So we talk about teen suicide, and that's very, horrific. And like, suicide is always horrific. Don't get me wrong. Suicide is always a terrible thing. You know, many of us have memories of friends of ours who died by suicide, and it carries us our whole life. Like, I certainly have that. A friend of mine when I was younger committed suicide, died by suicide, and I carried that with me all the time. Nonetheless, the fact is, if you look at the suicide rates in the US, and I wrote an article about this recently, the 85 to 89 age group is the highest suicide rate. Legalization of euthanasia now is a real threat. People are feeling suicidal. They experience suicidal ideation. We've got a lot of loneliness in our culture. And sometimes death seems to be the best way out for some people. Not that they want it, not that they're seeking it, not that they're enjoying this concept. It's just that they've become so enveloped in where they're at in their life that they start thinking that maybe death's the way out. So we recognize that interconnectedness is a very important part of preventing people from seeking death by euthanasia or suicide. We help them find a purpose to live. It's not only this program, but if you're talking to people who are involved with things like palliative care, they would talk about the importance of finding little meanings. So when you have someone who is, approaching death, you wanted to help them find little hopes in life, because this might be very difficult on them emotionally, right? They might be going through a very difficult time. And so what the role of the palliative care person who's got some training and experience with this is to help the person as they're nearing death to find little hopes, little meanings, little purposes, so they continue to their natural death and they have a good death, right? Well, this isn't necessarily about people who are dying either. You might be visiting someone who might outlive you. But the point of it is that we're helping people find a purpose to live. Participation in My Story will significantly lower depression. The whole concept of this, you see this in nursing homes too, where they do a little My Story. You go visit people in a nursing home and they've got a little story on the door of the person in that room. We're taking it much further than that. The whole concept came from the fact that there was some significant research done in the US. Several universities that did significant research on when you visit people in nursing homes and you ask them about themselves, how that changes their perception of themselves and of their own life. And it really, really changed the feelings. Like, if they did a survey, they found that a certain percentage of people in that institution were depressed. And after they went through the program of talking to them, asking them about their lives, writing down their stories, talking to them about it, listening to them, that when they asked them about depression later, that they found out that the numbers had dropped astronomically because you help people find a purpose in their life and you gave them meaning just by talking to them about themselves. The ability to care for others is so important and guiding the next generation. We all have this feeling. We all want to pass something on. Like I'm only 52, but I'm interested in passing something on. I've got 2 grandkids. I like to spend time with my grandkids. I love having my kids around because it's important that we share our lives with others and to pass something on. So we're ensuring people by writing down their story that their life had meaning and has meaning, and they're going to pass something on. Now, remember, obviously, that if you're writing down a story for someone, they've agreed to do this. Remember, they have to agree to do this. That we would never publish anything, or you can't share anything unless someone actually says they would be willing to do that. Why I'm saying that is, if we were actually doing something that like the Catholic Women's League in the London Diocese did, is they created like a My Story for quite a few of the ladies who had been leaders in the past, and so they were produced within this sort of series of My Stories, and that helps them also with their own history. But obviously, every lady who wanted their story published agreed to have their story published. There's just no question about it. But you see, this is an important thing for all of us to share and to connect to the past. Loneliness is a psychological state. Okay, there's physical things that lead to loneliness, but there's also a psychological state, okay? And there's a risk it leads to early death, loneliness. If you look at the data, people who are experiencing loneliness are far more likely to die earlier, whether that was because of health problems, or we see the suicide risk is higher amongst these people. Loneliness leads to depression. It's a normal human reality. You know, when someone says, when a priest is visiting someone in the hospital and they're saying, I don't know why I'm alive, Father, are they saying, Father, please kill me? Or are they actually going through normal human feelings of, you know, I'm dealing with the questioning. I'm approaching a final time of my life, and I'm dealing with the question of my purpose, my meaning. And this is normal. It's a normal feeling. Not that they're rejecting God in any way. Is that what they're doing is they're experiencing these normal questioning, and they might be experiencing deep loneliness and depression at the same time. My story eases these transitions in life. Conversation combats loneliness. My story promotes and reinforces a person's place in society. You know, I talk about often about the story about the woman who lived across the street from us, as I say, when we moved to Glencoe. And Genevieve, our daughter, was about 6 when we moved to Glencoe, and Mrs. McDonald across the street, she was around 90. And Genevieve used to go visit Mrs. McDonald. Well, first of all, we knocked on the door and said, you know, is it okay? Genevieve seems to want to visit you. Would that be okay? And she said, oh, yes, I would love to have Genevieve over. I would love to have Genevieve come visit. Well, Genevieve started visiting regularly. And you'd say, well, that's okay, a little 6-year-old girl visiting this older lady. Now, she was a retired teacher, and she enjoyed Genevieve coming over. And then our Tom, who was about 3 at the time, said, can I go over and visit Mrs. McDonald? And it was like, holy camole, no, that might be too much. That might be too much. So I went over and visited Mrs. McDonald. Mrs. McDonald said, I'd love to have Tom over. Love, he can come over. Absolutely. So then Genevieve and Tom were visiting Mrs. McDonald. We'd say to them, well, what are you doing over at Mrs. McDonald's house? Oh, we play hide and seek, or sometimes Mrs. McDonald reads us a story and things like that. I'm thinking, well, okay, sounds good. She never complained. No problem, no issues. They were certainly enjoying it. Well, then Mrs. McDonald did die. They were still kids, were quite young. Mrs. McDonald died. She died a natural death. She was getting older. And so we went to the funeral home, bringing Genevieve and Tom with us. And Mrs. McDonald's children were in line, right? And we go to greet them. We live across the street. My name's Alex. My wife's Susan. This is Genevieve and Tom. They knew all about Genevieve and Tom. They said, oh, our mother would talk about them all the time. No, that's what she always talked about, Genevieve and Tom. Well, I'm saying, I'm not asking you to be a Genevieve and a Tom, but what I'm saying is that was so important to Mrs. McDonald. Now, she wasn't necessarily alone and lonely per se, but she had an important place in the life, and it was important to her. And she enjoyed them. Well, I'm hoping that we can help in some way, actually, not the same way as Genevieve and Tom, but in some way be like that and help somebody. We recognize the importance of being with the other. It helps a person reconcile their past. Talking about their life helps them reconcile their past. It could be difficult at times, And we're certainly not in any way ones who would ever encourage that. We're just simply asking questions. Someone might never share with you the issues of their past that they have pain with, but they might. And that might help them. It fulfills a psychological need. So once again, we're not trying to be professionals in any way. We're just trying to be friendly and caring for someone and recognize the importance of that person being with us. So your story is important. You are important. And that's the whole purpose of the concept of the My Story program, and the concept of visiting goes directly with that, that you are important. That person is important, and their life is important. The life they've lived is important. The life they are living is important. And I think it's very important. And we recognize that in this culture today, a lot of people don't have that same type of situation. So social relationships, social engagement, preventing isolation, validation, these are also important things that we're doing. These are special individuals with a lifetime of experience. Even someone who, they might have lived a very simple life. They got married, they spent so many years maybe raising their children, then they worked maybe in a grocery store for a while. These kind of things, you'd say, well, but they did other things too, and you talk about it. What they did was important and has meaning, even if they might even question it themselves. Trauma. Well, reminiscent therapy is important. We're not trying to do any therapy, but reminiscing is important. It helps us deal with our psychological trauma. It creates a sense of peace or relief. It's a healing for our lives. Basic questions. So that's what the program goes through with the My Story. You have a list of basic questions. Some might not apply to somebody at all. Some might apply to them. Someone might want to talk about something totally different. I suggest to people when you're visiting and they say, yes, I'm happy to take part in the My Story. I'm happy to talk about my story. You're interested in my story? I'm happy to tell you about my story. I tell people that use the booklet as the guidance for questions because it helps you with those, but to take a notepad with you, because someone might want to talk about, gosh, they might have played baseball when they were younger and they were a great baseball player, and then they want to go on and on about baseball. Well, you have no room in your book about that. They're telling you all the stories that they played, semi-pro baseball. They did this, they did that. Who knows? As I say, there's no room in the book for that, but that's what they want to talk about. The other thing I'm going to say to you is you don't have to necessarily be someone who talks to people. There's a lot of people, you're going to visit them. Guess what? They want to talk. And sometimes silence is the answer. So we do have time for questions here, and it's the end of session 1, and it's 8:39. So I'm thinking we have honored your time. Tomorrow night does start at 7. People have their hands up. If you unmute yourself, we're happy to take questions.
With reference to visiting, I've visited a number of people, and it's always best to go to the front desk and speak to the staff.
Yes.
Before you go up to visit anybody.
Right.
You have to register usually, give them your name, phone number, etc. And another thing, I had an experience, I had a kidney stone, and just last week. And the person in the bed next to me, there was a curtain drawn, and there were 5 medical staff around her. Okay, so she came in, she was marked in critical condition, and then they were going to operate and put a pacemaker in. However, what really bothered me was they were questioning her as to, well, tell me, do you want to be resuscitated if anything happens, And I mean, like, that is not going to make people feel comfortable when they're going in for any kind of procedure.
Yeah, no, as you know, usually these are questions that people decide ahead of time. They're encouraged to have a power of attorney document. So for instance, my organization, Euthanasia Prevention Coalition, does distribute power of attorney documents for $10 that deal with these questions. So really, people should decide those things ahead of time, that in certain circumstances they would want to be resuscitated or not be resuscitated. But I do agree that there seems to be a lot of pressure on people as they're trying to receive the treatment they need to make decisions which are pretty life and death oriented. Yes. Now, as for your comment about the going to the front desk ahead of time, obviously when you're going to an institution such as a nursing home, you're going to need to do that, and you obviously need to plan your visit ahead of time. So you want to make sure that person's knowing you're coming. But sometimes you'll be visiting someone who's in their home, like they've become a type of a shut-in because their health has deteriorated to the point where they're not coming to church anymore, not because they don't want to be there, but because their health is deteriorated and they just can't physically walk to church anymore. They may not have someone giving them a ride, et cetera, et cetera. So then you're going to their home. So these would be different circumstances, but nonetheless, yes, you have to, before you go into a nursing home, make sure that you've signed the form and you've been there, and all those other things we talked about ahead of time, that you have to follow the rules that they have, et cetera.
I'd just like to congratulate you, first of all, on a wonderful program. I've never been involved in it, but I have attended courses where our students have, within the courses of evangelization, where our students have pointed out the problems you're mentioning. The need for seniors is in our diocese is a major concern. The loneliness for seniors, the care of seniors, the depression in seniors, and you have a program that can help with that in our community as well. So first of all, thank you for that. I just want to make one comment on having been a home visitor for people with problems for almost 40 years. In one of the poems I've written, I didn't know why I wrote it. It said something like, their thoughts are your cures. Meaning that the people I go to see sometimes have something to say to me that I needed to hear. It's not always what I have to say to them. In the field of blindness, that's very important, because you don't want to lecture people on what they need to know. Sometimes you've got to accept their abilities and insight. And just the final thing on my observation is that we all seek to help, of course, in these ways. We are concerned about the right to life. We are concerned about, in Canada, about the right to life, that issue. And not only among infants and those in the womb, but those that are elderly. We are concerned that we give people reasons to live. So that was very interesting in your program.
Yeah, thank you, Dennis. So Kathy's next, and then Jean.
Okay, thank you, Alex. I just want to first of all say thank you for this amazing program and all the insight into it and all the wonderful questions people are asking. And Kathy, all your hard work with all that family you got behind you there, all the hard work you do. I am a geriatric therapist, and I specialize, my expertise with people with dementia, moderate to severe dementia. And I think it was Bernie that made the point, which is a very good point, that if you're going into a nursing home, it's best to check with your recreation director and talk to them and say, I'd like to come in to visit. Can you, would you have anyone you'd like me to visit who's in most need? And let her have an interview with you so she can get an idea who you are and match you up very well with a resident.
Yeah.
Also, now with the COVID going on, and a lot of homes still have masks that you have to go in, excuse me. And to remember that residents who are somewhat hard of hearing, they lip read. And so they'll lose a lot of the information you might be telling them because you're wearing a mask. And people who have a type of past that could be a very abusive past, like I worked a lot with Holocaust survivors, and bringing up the past could be a dangerous area to go to if you're not equipped for it. Because it could bring up a lot of really hardship that they haven't been able to deal with. And now because of the dementia, they can't deal with it. So it's really good to know, to have that interview with the recreation director or nursing staff to know the resident well enough before you go in and spend time with them.
Right.
I guess that's about it. All I wanted to say.
So
Thank you.
the one comment is that the second half, which is tomorrow night, we'll deal with issues around disability, hearing issues, all these kind of things, communication with people with disabilities, these kind of issues. The second thing I have to say is that, there's different reasons why people would be trained for this program, and we're obviously throwing a wider net. Some of it's because they're involved with the church community and they're visiting then the members of that church, right? And there's a natural connection. But obviously some other people might want to be involved just visiting people in the nursing homes and talking to them and spending time with them. And obviously you just can't do that. You need, as you're saying, to first talk to the people at that home and have them know what you're doing and have permission and direction. Absolutely, without a question. Yeah, the idea of this is not to create a, how would you say, a wild west where we're just going to go into people's homes and that's the last thing we want. But what we do want to do is provide training so people feel better about it. I'll say one thing. My mother has been doing visiting forever, like forever. When I grew up, my mother was always visiting people, like those who know my mother. Anyway, and no one asked her to get any training for that years ago. But you can't do that anymore. Not to say that my mother ever caused any problems. She's sort of a wonderful woman. She didn't cause any problems. Nonetheless, you can see what I'm getting to. Today, we need to provide a lot of information for people to make sure that they have awareness before they go visit people. But thank you, Kathy.
My story, like, what do you do with them when you're finished with them? Like, do you ever offer them to the person or their family, or?
Right. That is the idea. But it all depends, right? Because as an example, now obviously speaking, if you're talking about my story, really that person actually owns that. That is their reminiscing. That's their story. If they allow you to share it with others, that's because they've allowed you to share it with others. You have no right to take that and just sort of share it with others. But someone might want that. As an example, as I said, the Catholic Women's League in the Diocese of London, they started collecting stories. And what was interesting is a bunch of these ladies were saying, oh, they got a call from someone saying, we hear you're collecting stories about past and everything. I'd like to be part of that. And so they were just colleagues saying, can I be part of that too? And so that was interesting because they knew that there was a dual purpose here. They were, talking to these ladies, but at the same time, they were collecting stories for their own history, right? So that was the interconnectedness of it. But yes, you would share it with their families, etc. That would be a wonderful thing to do. And the other thing is you're not just collecting a story, you're creating a relationship. So we're not saying, oh, you should go visit them, and after the 13th visit, when the whole story thing is finished and everything, and you're done with it, then you go on to now talk to John instead, and you don't visit Wayne anymore. No, we would suggest that if you've created a relationship with someone, you should continue to talk to that person. It's a very important thing to do.
Anyway. Yeah, you can also buy books in the store where you take it, where kids can take it to their grandparents or great grandparents or whatever. It's got the same idea.
You alluded to the UK doing some research and linking in with their health system. A few years back, I had an opportunity to take a training from a group of people that came over from England, and they were talking about social prescribing, which initially was a lot of people were going to their doctors, not just for their meds, or because they had an issue, but more to talk to the doctor because they were lonely. And doctors can only prescribe and doctors can only diagnose. But what the idea was, that the doctor could say, I can see maybe there's a need for this person to connect with something. And prior to COVID hitting, we started a program at Belleville Quinte West Community Health Center of Breakfast of Champions. And every other week, we put on a breakfast in the morning, and people came in from the community. And I used to sit down, we cooked, there was volunteers cooked. And I had opportunity to sit down and talk to them, have a coffee myself with them. And I said, how do you like the food? And they said, it's great. And they said, you know what we like more? We like the idea of coming together instead of being alone in our places.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
It was going great guns until COVID, and then it put everybody back again. And I'm looking forward to a time when all this will open up and get people out, communicate with each other, because isolation breeds depression and bad thoughts all the way across the board. And I'd like to say I thoroughly enjoyed this session and looking forward to the next one.
Thank you very much, John. Yeah, so we're trying to honor people's time. So it's 8:52, and Kathy, you might want to say a final word, and then
Sure.
And we're looking forward to everyone being with us tomorrow night.
That's right.
Kathy, go ahead.
Yes. So if any one of you would like, definitely please reach out to us via email. Our email is info@beingwith.org, excuse me. And if you need a copy of these books, you can email me directly and I can mail them to you. These books are wonderful because you could use one per person. We have them printed, they're ready. They're already, available. So I'll be heading into the office tomorrow. I'll actually be there in person. And if you need a copy physically and you happen to be in the London area, you can pick one up during the day and I can meet you myself, or I can mail it to you and then you'll receive it in a few days. So you'll be ready with the training manual to review, as well as the manuals, the workbooks themselves. And otherwise, we'll look forward to seeing everyone tomorrow night at 7 o'clock. And thank you again for joining us.
And if you didn't receive it by email or you missed the email, Kathy, you can just email her and she'll email it to you.
Yep.
And she's happy to mail it out. Obviously, you won't get it immediately by mail, but you know what I mean. She's happy to mail it out if that's what she needs. So very good.
That's right.
And we're looking forward to seeing everyone tomorrow. And thanks for joining us.
Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful evening.
Thank you. And
Thank you.
have a good